I jolted awake to the sound of my circuit breaker popping like a firecracker on the 4th of July. My shed lights blinked off, my electric saw stopped mid-cut, and my backup generator didn't even flinch. It was already drained. At first, I thought maybe a raccoon had crawled inside and chewed a wire again. But when I walked into the shed and noticed the extension cord trailing out from under the back wall toward the community green space, something didn't feel right. I followed it like a trail of breadcrumbs until I heard the gentle hum of something charging in the distance. Rounding the hedgerow, I nearly burst out laughing when I saw it. There, under the cover of darkness, was HOA President Karen, crouched like a cartoon villain, plugging her candy apple red golf cart into my solar-powered shed, on my land, like it was her personal charging station. The sheer audacity nearly knocked me over. That night, as I sat on my porch sipping iced tea and replaying the footage from my shed camera, an idea sparked in my mind, brighter than any fuse she'd blown. I looked over at the bull fence powering my livestock paddock, and grinned. If she wanted a charge, oh, I'd give her one. The next morning dawned like any other, sun beaming, roosters hollering, and the distant whirring of someone's leaf blower breaking the peace. But for me, everything had changed. I wasn't just some quiet farmer anymore. I was now a man whose property was being used like a community gas station, all without permission. I spent the early hours examining the shed's breaker panel and realized Karen's nightly visits had drained my backup battery system to the point where my automated feeders for the chickens had failed. That explained why they'd been extra loud this morning. I muttered a string of words under my breath that would have made a preacher blush and stomped over to the edge of the property. The grass near the fence line was pressed down with cart tire track. The nerve. By mid-morning, Karen had the audacity to waltz right up to my property in her sun hat and oversized sunglasses like she was doing me a favor. She clutched a rolled-up HOA violation in one hand and wore a smirk that could sour milk. Without even acknowledging what she'd done, she started with, "Thomas, we've had a few complaints from the board. Your shed's solar panels are reflecting too brightly onto the walking trail. It's disruptive. Consider repositioning them." I stared at her, then at the paper she handed me. "Also," she added, feigning concern, "there've been whispers of someone overusing power in the area. Just a friendly reminder to conserve." She walked off with a tight-lipped smile before I could even respond. I didn't need a detective to figure out she was projecting her guilt onto me like a spotlight. But fine, if that's the game she wanted to play, I was ready. I spent that afternoon reviewing the footage from the past 2 weeks. Each night, right around 2 a.m., Karen snuck in like clockwork, extension cord in hand, dragging it behind her like a mischievous toddler. She'd open my shed door, plug into my outlet, and sit in her golf cart browsing her phone until her cart had enough juice to make it back up the trail. And every single time, she'd leave the cord hanging or half-buried, expecting me not to notice. That's when it clicked. She didn't just stumble upon an outlet, she'd been doing this regularly, deliberately. She thought I wouldn't catch on. Worse, she thought I wouldn't do anything about it. Well, Karen clearly didn't know I'd grown up on a cattle ranch where we learned young not to poke the bull, especially the one running a power grid. That night, I waited until dusk and went to work. First, I rerouted the extension cord line inside the shed to a dummy outlet. Then I wired that outlet directly into the Energizer line from my electric fence, rated specifically for bulls and wild hogs, mind you. I also rigged it with a failsafe so none of my real equipment would get zapped. Safety first, after all. Then, just to be sure, I mounted an extra camera to catch every angle. I even replaced the light bulb in the shed with a soft blue LED, just so the glow would seem extra welcoming. If she was going to sneak in again, she was walking right into my trap. As expected, the next night, I saw the faint glimmer of rhinestones from her sequined sweatshirt as she crept through the hedges like a budget spy. I nearly spilled my sweet tea when she reached the cord and happily plugged in her cart without a second thought. I held my breath, watching the monitor. There was a pause. Then a snap, a sizzle, and a scream that could have woken the rooster 3 hours early. Karen jumped back so fast she nearly cartwheeled. Her wig flew sideways, her glasses hit the grass, and she stumbled into a shrub, clutching her hand like it had just met God. Her golf cart, meanwhile, lit up like a Christmas tree before the charger popped loose and the cart rolled back into a ditch. She scrambled to her feet, cussing loud enough to startle the deer. From the audio feed, I caught her yelling, "This man's got a death trap on his shed. I'll sue. I'm calling the HOA." I muted the mic and laughed so hard I wheezed. I half expected her to come banging on my door, but she must have been too embarrassed because she vanished into the night, dragging her charger cord like a defeated dog on a leash. The next morning, sure enough, there she was, storming down the HOA trail with 2 other board members in tow. They stood at my fence, waving their arms until I walked over. Karen did all the talking, trying to sound civil but barely containing her rage. "Tom, it appears your property has become hazardous. One of our residents was injured due to an improperly grounded outlet." I folded my arms and kept my voice calm. "You mean the outlet in my private shed? The one someone trespassed onto my property to use without permission?" Her eyes narrowed. "You can't prove that." That's when I pulled out my phone and hit play. The footage showed her plugging in, getting zapped, and flopping into the bush like a flipped pancake. One of the board members actually snorted, trying not to laugh. Karen looked like she wanted to melt into the dirt. I added casually, "Oh, and just for the record, that outlet's connected to a live bull fence. For my livestock. The sign is clearly posted." She opened her mouth to argue but couldn't find a single word. The HOA reps walked off in awkward silence, and Karen followed behind them, muttering something about legal action. I didn't care. Because at that moment I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. But next time I'd be the one flipping the switch first. Karen didn't waste any time. The very next morning after her electrifying midnight adventure, she turned up the heat. I was barely 2 sips into my coffee when a white envelope was shoved through my mailbox with a thick red stamp across the top that read HOA immediate notice. Inside was a letter citing me for having an unauthorized security system and endangering the community with hazardous electrics. I laughed out loud. Apparently, Karen's definition of trespassing and tampering with private property had been replaced with victimhood and blame shifting. Still, I knew this was more than just an angry letter. This was the opening move in Karen's counterattack, and judging by the fact that 3 more citations arrived within the next 24 hours, including one for having an unpermitted structure within view of the community walking trail, she wasn't planning to play fair. That evening, I saw her standing with a clipboard near the edge of her property, flanked by 2 other HOA members I barely recognized. One of them was a guy named Brent, who had moved in 6 months ago and was rumored to think a hummingbird feeder violated the HOA's wildlife policy. Karen was talking fast, pointing toward my shed, and pretending to be some kind of expert on electrical compliance. I kept my distance and watched from my porch, arms crossed, letting her tire herself out. But the look in her eyes wasn't just annoyance anymore, it was vengeance. She didn't just want to get even. She wanted to shut me down completely. I got my first taste of her next tactic the following night. Around 9 p.m., just as I was winding down, the power in my shed flickered again. Only this time, I'd already rerouted the circuits and backed up the system. Nothing fried, but the spike was enough to set off a few alerts. I checked the monitors and, sure enough, someone had tried plugging something in again. But it wasn't Karen. This time it was a kid, probably no more than 16, clearly sent as a proxy. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder as he dragged a new cord from the cart path. I caught him just before he could touch anything and shouted out the window, causing him to bolt like a scared rabbit. The message was clear. Karen wasn't finished. She was just outsourcing her dirty work. The next morning, I walked over to the community bulletin board, just to see what else she might have cooked up. As expected, there was a new flyer. Community Electrical Safety Alert in all caps, complete with a grainy photo of my shed taken from a zoomed-in cell phone camera. The flyer claimed I had installed potentially lethal wiring that could endanger local children and pets. There was even a call for signatures to temporarily suspend my solar setup until a third-party inspection could be performed. It was pure slander, but I knew Karen was banking on fear and ignorance to rally the neighborhood. Unfortunately for her, I wasn't the type to play defense for long. That same day, I called the county's electrical inspector and agricultural compliance officer, both of whom I knew personally through my work with local farms. They came out within 48 hours and gave my entire setup a glowing report. Not only was my shed's power grid 100% compliant, but they were also impressed by the energy efficiency of my design and the redundancy of my livestock protection systems. The inspector even chuckled when I showed him the modified outlet and the footage of Karen getting zapped. "I've seen a lot of stupid," he said, "but this is creative stupid." Better yet, when he looked around the property, he noticed something peculiar. Karen's house had a suspicious-looking cable running from the side, through the hedge, and down along the ground in the direction of my paddock. He followed it all the way back to the community trail, where it split into a camouflaged junction box feeding several small conduit. He squinted at it, made a call, and within hours, it was confirmed. Karen had set up an unauthorized backfeed system that tapped into neighborhood utilities to supply her golf cart charging station and even power her backyard fountain. That's not just sneaky, it's illegal. The compliance officer issued a formal notice, and a citation was delivered straight to her mailbox. But it didn't stop there. The utility company followed up with their own team, and when they found evidence that she'd been diverting energy through buried lines without proper permits, the fines piled up fast. I didn't have to lift a finger. Karen had done all the heavy lifting herself, and now she was caught with wires in her hands and her lies unraveling faster than her reputation. Of course, Karen wasn't going down quietly. That weekend, she organized what she called a neighborhood walkthrough. It was basically just a poorly disguised mob dragging clipboard-toting residents past my property while she pointed at things like my garden fence, the color of my tool shed, and even the sound of my wind chimes. She had a lot to say about visual pollution. I sat calmly on my porch the whole time, sipping lemonade and waving every time they passed. My dog, Scout, added his own commentary with a perfectly timed bark every time she gestured at my shed. But what Karen didn't know was that the entire time she was trying to stir the pot, I had already submitted a report to the HOA Oversight Council downtown. See, while Karen played neighborhood dictator, she'd failed to file her conflict of interest disclosures regarding the developer she was in talks with. Word had gotten around that a golf course project was being quietly negotiated, and Karen was lobbying hard to turn part of our shared land into a cart access path, one that would need to run right through the back corner of my property. She needed my land. Her little charging stunt? That was just phase one. But she underestimated the bull again. By Monday morning, the real show began. A county utility officer posted a violation tag on Karen's main electrical panel, citing backfeed hazards and illegal connections. Her golf cart sat in the driveway, dead and dirty, with a tangled cord coiled sadly beside it. Even worse, HOA members had started whispering. Not everyone liked Karen's iron-fisted rule, and now that she was caught breaking the very rules she enforced, the mutiny was gaining traction. Brent, who had nodded so confidently at her earlier, suddenly stopped responding to her emails and started attending meetings without her. I knew she'd try to retaliate again. That's what people like her do when they lose control. But I also knew I wasn't just defending a shed or a power line. I was protecting my land, my home, and my right not to be bullied by someone who thought the HOA badge made her untouchable. Karen thought she was charging her golf cart. What she was really doing was charging full speed into a mess she'd never escape. And now she was about to find out just how powerful a fed-up farmer could be. It was almost poetic, The way Karen's perfectly manicured world began unraveling one ugly thread at a time. The golf cart that had once zipped smugly down the trail now sat useless in her driveway, covered in dust and pine pollen, a flat tire sagging like a deflated ego. Her HOA flyers were slowly being peeled off the community board and replaced with notices from the utility company about energy audits and fines for noncompliance. But even with the walls closing in, Karen wasn't giving up. She was just shifting tactics, and this time, she was aiming to drag me through the mud along with her. 2 days after her backfeed setup was discovered and shut down, I got a certified letter delivered to my porch by none other than Karen herself. She didn't say a word, just smirked and held the envelope out with 2 fingers like it was a summons from the Queen herself. I took it and shut the door without blinking. Inside was a formal notice of intent to pursue legal action. The document claimed emotional distress, bodily harm, reputational damage, and a laundry list of half-truths dressed up like legal arguments. According to her, I had intentionally set a malicious trap using agricultural equipment meant to cause bodily injury and distributed surveillance footage without consent for public humiliation purposes. It was laughable, but I wasn't laughing. Not because I believed it had merit, but because I knew Karen was trying to bait me into a mistake. She wanted me to respond in kind, to panic, to lose control. But I had something better than panic. I had preparation. The next morning, I visited my cousin Dean, who happened to be a civil litigation attorney with a special talent for demolishing baseless lawsuit. I handed him the letter, and he didn't even read the whole thing before snorting with disbelief. "She's accusing you of turning your electric fence into a weapon?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's a livestock deterrent. It's not even lethal. It's posted. She was trespassing. This is nonsense." He told me to sit tight and let him handle it. A few days later, he fired back with a formal response reminding Karen's attorney, if she had a real one, that she had been recorded on video committing repeated acts of trespassing, theft of electricity, and unauthorized interference with agricultural property. He also included a nice little warning about the penalties for filing a frivolous lawsuit. That shut things down quickly. But Karen wasn't done making noise. If she couldn't win in court, she'd win in the court of public opinion, or at least, she'd try. That weekend, she printed out dozens of copies of a new flyer. This one had a giant image of her bruised wrist from the shock and a headline in bold letters that read "Danger Next Door." She accused me of housing illegal wiring, building unregulated electric traps, and being a threat to families and pets. She placed them on every door in the neighborhood, even slid one into my mailbox like she thought it'd shame me into submission. It didn't. What it did was push everyone else in the community over the edge. By Monday, a few neighbors had gathered around the community center in what was supposed to be an informal HOA garden committee meeting. But the topic quickly shifted from roses and mulch to Karen and her warpath. Someone asked, did she really get shocked trying to charge her cart off someone else's property? Another added, is it true she was tapping power lines without a permit? The rumors had already taken root, but now they were sprouting fast. More and more neighbors came forward with their own stories. Karen moving boundary markers, Karen issuing fines over holiday lights, Karen calling code enforcement over a playset. It all poured out. Suddenly, the crowd that once nodded politely at her demands was beginning to look angry. She'd ruled the HOA like a queen with a clipboard, but now the villagers were gathering with torches, and not the polite kind. Brent, the former ally who had stood beside her during her walkthrough, made a quiet but important move. He requested an emergency meeting with the HOA board and proposed a motion of no confidence. That was rare, nearly unheard of, but he wasn't alone. Half the board had gone silent after Karen's utility scandal. The other half looked nervous. Still, protocol was protocol. The motion was approved to be voted on in the next official meeting. Karen didn't take that lightly. That same night, she stood on her porch and shouted into a megaphone. No kidding, an actual megaphone. She accused the HOA of corruption, claimed she was being punished for doing the hard work nobody else wanted to, and announced that she would not be stepping down without a fight. It would have been comical if not for how furious she looked. Her voice cracked under the strain, and at one point, she even waved the same flyer that had failed to scare anyone into compliance. People came out to watch, some with phones recording, others shaking their heads. Nobody clapped. Nobody stood with her. It was the beginning of the end. Meanwhile, I kept my distance. I'd already won the first battle, and now the second one was unfolding on its own. I didn't need to fan the flames. Karen was doing that all by herself, one tantrum at a time. But I wasn't idle. While she shouted, I was documenting. Every HOA violation, every power line she laid without permission, every witness statement from neighbors who'd seen her snooping on my land. I compiled it all into a neat, time-stamped file. Not to escalate. Not yet. But just in case she tried one more stunt, I'd be ready. And she did. Just 2 nights before the HOA vote, I caught her on my outer trail again. This time she was armed with bolt cutters, kneeling beside my fence like she was about to snip through the wire. Maybe she thought it would make me look unsafe. Maybe she wanted to fake another injury. But she never got that far. Scout barked, lights came on, and my motion sensor triggered a spotlight directly on her. She froze like a deer in headlights, caught mid-crime. I didn't even have to confront her. She dropped the cutters and ran, tripping over her own sandals and vanishing into the darkness. The next day, I filed a formal trespassing report with the sheriff's department. This time with video footage. The deputy who came to take my statement was more amused than surprised. "That lady's got more drama than a daytime soap," he said, shaking his head. "But hey, at least now it's official." Karen was issued a warning and advised to stay off my land entirely or face charges. By the time the HOA vote rolled around, the writing was on the wall. The meeting was packed, standing room only. Karen came dressed like she was giving a campaign speech, but her voice trembled. She gave one final attempt at saving face, talking about tradition, pride, order, and responsibility. But the moment someone asked about the unauthorized wires and the flyer defamation, she folded. The vote came in swiftly. 4-1 in favor of removing her from the HOA presidency. The one vote for her? Herself. As she walked out of the meeting room, her golf cart still lifeless in her driveway, something had clearly shifted. The woman who once barked orders and handed out citations now looked like she was shrinking into the background. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just tipped my hat to the board, thanked them for the fairness of the process, and walked home. I had no need for revenge anymore. The community had delivered it for me, slow and public, just the way Karen hated most. For a few peaceful days, the neighborhood settled into a rare calm. Karen's megaphone disappeared, the HOA meetings resumed with a level of civility no one remembered existing before, and even the wind seemed to blow a little more softly through the pine trees. I kept to myself, spending my mornings in the barn and my afternoons fixing the shed wiring that Karen had nearly torched with her amateur power stunt. Brisket, my hefty but good-natured bull, had taken to lounging near the edge of the pasture where the trail used to see a lot of foot traffic, as if he enjoyed the quiet too. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. People like Karen didn't just vanish into their porches after being humiliated. They regrouped. They stewed. And then they struck back with twice the desperation. It happened on a Thursday night. I had just closed up the shed and was walking back to the house when I noticed something strange. The gate latch to the bull paddock was unlocked. Not broken, just sitting there loose, like someone had tried to be careful not to make a sound. I paused, heart picking up a beat, and scanned the area. Everything else looked normal. Brisket was munching hay as usual. But when I turned toward the shed, something caught my eye. The side door, which I always secured with a slide bolt, was slightly ajar. I crept closer and spotted fresh shoe prints in the dirt, heading toward the rear where the electric fencing hardware was installed. I flipped on the interior light and saw what she'd done. The control box was open. Wires had been pulled, rerouted, and poorly taped together with electrical tape in an obvious act of sabotage. Whoever did this had no real knowledge of circuitry, but just enough gall to mess with what they didn't understand. I stepped back and took a long breath. It was Karen. I didn't need a camera to know it. The way the wires were clipped, the direction of the shoe prints, the gate left undone, it was all her, plain as day. I checked the cameras and sure enough, around 1:03 a.m. the previous night, there she was on the footage, wearing all black, a hoodie pulled over her head, and bolt cutters in hand. She looked both ridiculous and completely serious at the same time. She moved like someone on a mission, creeping around like she was in a heist movie. The only thing missing was background music. I backed up the footage and emailed it to both Dean, my cousin attorney, and the sheriff's department. This time, I wasn't going to just file a warning. This time, it was criminal. She had cut into an electrified livestock fence system, a clear safety risk, and tampered with privately owned agricultural equipment. If Brisket had gotten loose because of her meddling, things could have turned deadly. And while I was reviewing the damage, I got a call from my neighbor Marla. She was whispering like she didn't want someone to hear her. Apparently, Karen had been visiting neighbors again, this time going door to door spreading rumors that I'd booby-trapped the paddock, that I'd installed illegal devices under the shed floor, and that I had a secret deal with a local company to turn the land into a data center. It would have been laughable if she hadn't actually convinced a few people that I was hiding something. Her desperation was becoming dangerous. That evening, I reinforced the locks, double-checked the voltage settings, and even brought Brisket in early. I sat on the porch in the dark, waiting. I had a feeling Karen wasn't done. And just past midnight, my instincts were proven right. A shadow moved along the hedge line. She was back again. This time, she crouched by the shed and pulled something from her backpack. I zoomed in with the new spotlight camera I'd installed just for her. It was a small crowbar. She started prying at the corner panel of the shed like she thought there was something hidden inside. I let her work for a moment, watching her huff and grunt, clearly struggling against the bolts I'd reinforced just hours earlier. Then I flipped the spotlight on. She froze. Completely still, like a possum playing dead. Then, slowly, she stood, turned, and came face to face with me walking down the trail, flashlight in one hand, phone in the other. She opened her mouth to say something, but I raised my hand. "Don't bother," I said calmly. "Already called the sheriff. And this time, I've got everything." Her eyes darted, looking for a way out. But it was too late. A few minutes later, the deputy rolled up the trail, lights low, voice calm but firm. Karen didn't resist. She didn't argue. She just stood there, deflated and shaking, hands curled into fists at her sides. The look on her face wasn't rage anymore, it was defeat. Real, raw, and total. The next morning, the entire community was buzzing. Someone had filmed her being led to the patrol car and posted it to the local neighborhood forum with the caption, "HOA President Meets Real Authority." The comments were brutal. Memes spread like wildfire. Someone even edited a photo of her golf cart with crime scene tape around it. The HOA board released a statement distancing themselves entirely, stating that she had acted alone and without approval. Her name was officially removed from the registry within 48 hours. But the fallout wasn't just digital. That afternoon, I got a call from the county permitting office. Apparently, Karen had submitted a request last year on behalf of the HOA for potential land development that would include a paved golf cart path through my back pasture. She'd used her position to push for that trail and had tried to quietly reroute it to align with her proposed plans. She'd even sketched out a layout that required a utility easement, one that would go straight through my bull paddock. She didn't just want access to my power. She wanted my land. Everything suddenly made more sense. The golf cart, the fake violations, the sabotage. This had all been about control. But now, the tables were fully turned. With her off the board and facing legal consequences, the development proposal fell apart. The contractor she was working with reached out to me, hoping to salvage part of the deal. But I had other ideas. I didn't want to sell. I wanted to secure. So I fenced off the rear portion of my property, added a new solar-powered gate, and placed a large, permanent wooden sign that read, "Private agricultural land. Trespassers will be prosecuted. And possibly zapped." And just because poetic justice deserves a stage, I threw a small backyard celebration. Nothing fancy. Just friends, neighbors, and a few curious folks who had heard about the saga. We grilled burgers, set up a projector to replay the footage of Karen's midnight antics, and raised a toast to Brisket, the unlikely hero in a tale of power cords and pettiness. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to gloat. Watching Karen walk away from the only power she ever had, while her own lies electrocuted every chance she had left, that was more satisfying than anything I could have planned. The air felt different after Karen's fall from her self-appointed throne. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt like a neighborhood again. No more warning notes about flowerbed violations, no clipboard-wielding patrols scouring for wind chimes or mismatched patio furniture. Just folks tending gardens, kids riding bikes, and Brisket enjoying his now-famous paddock like a celebrity bull who'd just wrapped up his own reality show. But even as peace settled in, the aftermath of Karen's war still lingered. There were loose ends to tie, questions that needed answering, and an unexpected twist that would take the entire situation into stranger territory than anyone expected. I was out by the shed one morning adjusting the fencing voltage, this time with a more tamper-resistant configuration, when a black SUV rolled up the drive. At first, I thought it might be another utility inspector, but when the door opened and a man stepped out wearing a badge around his neck and a serious face, I knew this wasn't a casual visit. He introduced himself as Agent Rollins from the State Infrastructure Protection Division, a department I didn't even know existed. Apparently, my reports and submitted footage had been flagged by the county, and someone upstairs had taken a deeper look into Karen's wiring setup. Turns out, the lines she laid weren't just stealing neighborhood power, they'd been dangerously interfering with a municipal relay system connected to emergency communication towers on the other side of the ridge. Agent Rollins explained that Karen had illegally tapped into a buried conduit that carried backup power for the fire department's rural dispatch tower. Her tampering hadn't yet caused a failure, but it had created voltage inconsistencies that triggered automated alert. What she'd done crossed from HOA nonsense into potential interference with emergency infrastructure, a state-level offense. I stood there stunned, mouth slightly open, while Rollins asked if I'd be willing to provide testimony should the case escalate to criminal prosecution. I didn't hesitate. I handed over all the footage, all the reports, and everything I'd documented from the moment I caught her plugging in that golf cart. He thanked me and left with a folder so thick it could have stopped a bullet. Word spread fast. Faster than any of us expected. The neighborhood went from relieved to shocked, then furious. It wasn't just that Karen had lied, cheated, and manipulated, she'd put lives at risk. A few of the more tech-savvy neighbors pulled up infrastructure maps and realized how close she'd come to causing a failure during a storm the week prior. The county sent out an official letter confirming the investigation and outlining the violations found. It ended any remaining shred of sympathy someone might have had for her. If her reputation had been in tatters before, now it was ashes scattered in a windstorm. But in a weird way, Karen's downfall didn't just clean up the HOA, it unified the neighborhood in a way no potluck ever could. Suddenly, neighbors were organizing events, helping fix each other's fences, even offering to help me repaint the old barn wall that had taken a hit during her cable sabotage. One of the kids from the street down the hill even made a cartoon drawing of Brisket wearing sunglasses and stomping on a golf cart. It ended up as a mural on the side of my shed, and I didn't even mind. Humor has a way of healing what anger can't. A month after the incident, the HOA held a public meeting to elect a new board. This time, the process was transparent, the candidates were nominated by residents, and the room was packed with more people than I'd ever seen care about local matters. Brent, who had quietly distanced himself from Karen early on, gave a heartfelt speech about accountability, fairness, and rebuilding trust. He didn't try to spin the past or avoid it. He just addressed it head-on. That earned him the role of HOA chair, and judging by the applause, most folks agreed it was the right call. I was offered a spot on the board, too. Several neighbors approached me and said they wanted someone like me there. Calm, rational, and with a good bull if things got out of hand. I laughed but politely declined. I'd had enough HOA politics to last a lifetime. My shed was secure, my power was stable, and Brisket seemed to enjoy his retirement from hero status. I had everything I needed. Let someone else manage flowerbed complaints and pool schedules. But just when I thought the story had reached its satisfying conclusion, one final surprise showed up. This time not in the form of another Karen stunt, but a letter from the very developer Karen had once been secretly courting. Turns out, they still had interest in building a community trail system and wanted to purchase land for a future greenway path. Only now they wanted to negotiate with me directly, respectfully, and with full transparency. And the kicker? They were offering 10 times what Karen had once planned to quietly steal through underhanded deals. I didn't say yes, not immediately. I had grown fond of that stretch of pasture, and the thought of Brisket losing his shade tree didn't sit right. But I also saw the benefit in having a say in what happened next. So instead of selling, I proposed something better. I offered a lease agreement for a small, defined corridor of land that wouldn't disturb the animals or the fencing, with the condition that the path be open to the public only during daylight hours, remain quiet use only, and contain educational signage about agriculture and solar energy. To my surprise, they agreed. In the end, what started as an attempted power theft led to a deal that benefited the entire community, on my terms, not hers. Karen, meanwhile, vanished like fog in the sun. Her house was eventually listed for sale, her name removed from every community register, and no one ever spoke of her golf cart again, except in jokes and cautionary tales. She became a local legend for all the wrong reasons, a living example of how power without principle always short-circuits. On the 1-year anniversary of that first shocking night, we held a backyard barbecue. We called it Brisket's Bash, complete with decorations shaped like tiny fences and a ceremonial toast to charging forward. Everyone came, even the sheriff, who brought ribs and a new tale about someone trying to plug a hairdryer into a cattle fence 3 towns over. We laughed until our ribs hurt, shared food, stories, and for a moment, remembered how close we came to letting a single person control us all. I stood under the porch light, watching Brisket snort happily at a bowl of apples someone had left by the gate, and I smiled. The shed was still mine. The land was still mine. And the power? That would never belong to someone like Karen again. Because while some people steal electricity, others know how to harness it. And in the end, the real charge wasn't in the wires. It was in standing up for what was right, no matter how outrageous the storm.